This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
I'm calling this drop back and punt. If you've ever studied football or watched any amount of football, I'm talking American football here, you know that there's times when the team, their game plan doesn't, come to fruition, and they've got to change gears. And that's really what drop back and punt is referring to. In a COVID world, which we are still very much living in, and maybe for some time, nobody can predict the future, right? Variations of COVID may just be part of our lives moving forward. There's one thing I think everybody can agree on, and that is we just don't know from day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute, what new thing is going to show up and become, a part of our lives. Now, we get to choose what we input. We get to choose what we think about, always. Everything begins with what we think about. And it's no different when it comes to, having to change gears when that wasn't the plan. So I'm just going to tell you a quick story about, why this matters, how this came about, why I'm talking about this today. I'm in the process of a major transition. I'm in a major transition in my life, like one that I really didn't see coming. And yet, as I look at what led up to it, I can see it coming, if that makes sense. As such, I'm needing to set up new systems. I'm needing to set up a new routine. I'm needing to set up, I have to think differently about my life. And one of the things that I'm doing is setting up a new home office. Now, this all came about because my father died suddenly, unexpectedly, at the end of November of last year. And that's part of the reason why I've been so quiet. The holidays certainly had a role, but really I've just been grieving the loss of my dad. And because my mother cannot live on her own independently at this point, she's semi-independent, but she needs somebody. I decided that that person would be me. I can continue going on with my life. I just have to be doing it in a different place. So, drop back and punt. As part of this massive transition in my life, I am turning what was my father's study into my home office. And if you knew my dad, you knew that he was curious about everything. He was a scholar. He was an intellect. He read constantly. He printed things off the internet, reams and reams of paper. I think the paper companies, he was one of their favorite customers because, my father just printed everything because he didn't like reading on a screen. It's not how he learned to read, and he wasn't going to adapt. It's just too hard for him, his eyes. So notebooks and notebooks, binders and binders and books and books and books just fill this house and fill this space that was his study. And in order for it to become my space and reflect the environment that I need it to be, I'm rearranging, I'm throwing out, I'm painting, I'm, vacuuming, getting rid of just all the unnecessary and making it a space that I can do my best work in. So this morning I came in, I had my plan, I blocked time on my calendar for certain tasks, and the morning is when I do my heavy intellectual lifting, when I do my deep thinking, when I work on my writing, when I work on my podcast, when I do some studying and reaffirm for myself my short-term goals, my long-term goals, the vision, right? I subscribe to what Wallace Wattles teaches in The Science of Getting Rich, which is you don't get rich by doing certain things. You become rich by doing things in a certain way. And if you haven't read this book, highly recommend it. Add it to your library this year, sooner than later, because it's universal truth. So here I was, all set. I had breakfast. I made sure Mom was fed. I took, I took my shower. I got ready for the day, mentally, all of it. I came into my office and discovered there was no electricity to this room. Then I thought, what the heck? So this is an old house, and sometimes breakers pop. So I thought, all right, I learned how to reset the breakers, because in the kitchen, sometimes the breaker goes out, and my brother walked me through how to reset it. No problem, growing, right? Totally growth mindset. And I went down into the basement. I opened the panel, went to the other panel, nothing out of whack. No breaker, either, completely off to the opposite direction or in the center. So I called my brother because I'm like, is there something I'm missing? Is there another box that I didn't know about? He said, no. He goes, if you can wait till the end of the day, when I'm done with work, I'll swing by and I'll figure it out. Okay, great. Well, what this means is now that if I'm going to do the work that I set out to do, I have to physically move my equipment to another room and set up. Is this a bad thing? No. Is it inconvenient? A little bit. Is it a big deal? No, not really. So then I started to ask myself, okay, I have other things that I'm working on that don't require me to be on the computer right now. What if I dropped back and punted the ball and ran a different play? And so that's what I decided to do. I just completely shifted gears, but everything that I'm doing still falls under the big umbrella of my vision and of doing things in a certain way versus doing certain things. It doesn't matter the speed at which all of my dad's old books and magazines and papers and stuff leaves this room and goes to its new home, whether it's recycling or, one of the donation places, or somewhere in the house because, there's value to us in keeping, whatever book it might be or a certain, binder of stuff. The time frame for that isn't as important as the big vision for me turning this space into my home office where I can do my deep thinking. Again, I can think anywhere. Like right now, I'm just standing in the house talking, right? Capturing these thoughts. I'm not, sitting down in a perfect chair with the perfect angle of light coming in the perfect window that has the perfect view, blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of people that put stock in that. I don't. I've trained myself. I can improvise. I can, like I said, drop back and punt. And it's a skill, and that, like any other skill, if you don't practice, it'll, get rusty. But it is a lot like riding a bike. You will always have those fundamentals in your in your body. Your body will remember. And we can do the same thing with our minds. We can train our minds to remember a new way of doing something. We don't have to default to the way we've always done it. So, if you're a person who tends to react to certain triggers because you've done that for so long, you can train yourself to pause before you react and set a different path for yourself. And I think this is really key in becoming who we are, which is a lifelong journey. The end date to that, the arrival date to that is death. We can experience metaphorical deaths, and we do throughout our lives. And there's a lot that goes into processing the ends of something. The end of a physical body, like I just experienced with my dad, is one element of death, but there's so many other layers to death that our culture here in America doesn't really do a good job of addressing or even talking about. Everything is very, I don't know, there's a lot of looking back. There's a lot of, let's keep pumping the fear, keep being afraid, to really spread your wings, keep being afraid. And I can't, and I know many of you listening can't. Life is just too amazingly wonderful. I always think of that line from Thornton Wilder's play, Our Town, where Emily, she dies young. She's like 26 when she dies. And, she goes on to the afterlife and is granted one day to return to. And she chooses her 13th birthday and she goes back and she's witnessing her 13-year-old self going about the day. And she sees how young her mother was when she was 13, and she sees little things that George, the boy next door, who was the love of her life, did for her, and how she'd forgotten. We forget. There's so much input all the time, and it goes beyond these apps. Like the input that we're choosing culturally now, globally now, is through this little screen that we carry in our pocket, versus looking up and looking at each other and noticing the little things, Like I look out the window and I just saw a blue jay in the tree, and that blue jay's going about its day. It's following its code. It's living fully. It's thinking about food, and it's thinking about getting water, and it's thinking about shelter because it's cold and windy. We get so caught up in the meaningless stuff and overlook what's truly meaningful, which is saying good morning, which is paying attention to our soul's purpose, which is being able to drop back and punt when you need to and not letting it ruin your day or send you off over the moon. Drop back and punt, guys. Drop back and punt. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.